which just showed up on a list of 10 worst whiskeys ever that I happened to read.
What was number one?
Hello and welcome to My Tiny Bottles, the project where I'm exploring my grandmother's legacy of miniature liquor bottles, one tiny bottle at a time. I'm your host, Tammy Coxon, and I'm here today with Katie Stryjewski, better known as Garnish Girl on Instagram. Katie, tell people about yourself.
I'm a cocktail Instagrammer, I suppose. I mostly take photographs of recipes that I create. I work with liquor brands and PR companies to promote their products on social media and create content. And I also have a cocktail recipe book called Cocktails, Mocktails, and Garnishes from the Garden.
Nice. What's your favorite garnish?
Oh, I love edible flowers. I mean, they don't add much, if anything, flavor-wise, but, especially for Instagram, when people can't taste the drink, it's really great to give it that visual pop.
Absolutely. Yeah, I talk about, in my cocktail classes, I talk about functional garnishes versus decorative garnishes. And important to know when you can skip it and when you just can't.
Yes,
right?
yes.
All right. Well, the episode in my feed just before this one was about Black Velvet Canadian whiskey. And as I was researching this bottle, I realized that it was part of a trend in the 1970s of just incredibly sexist advertising. And, it was Black Velvet, but other things too. And I decided that was something that I wanted to talk about. And part of the episode is really talking about how, this is whiskey that's being marketed by using images of women, but it's not being marketed to women. And women didn't drink whiskey as much in the 90s, maybe for lots of different reasons. But I like whiskey. And when I asked you what you wanted to taste, you said, well, I'd like to taste whiskey, please.
Yes, I definitely love whiskey.
How'd you come to whiskey?
That's a good question. I think it was kind of the first spirit that I started making cocktails with. I started making old fashions, and that kind of led me to drinking, straight whiskey, bourbon, and things like that. And then I've been able to travel to Scotland a couple of times, which really just made me fall in love with Scotch. And so that's definitely one of my favorite categories.
Did you ever feel like you had any stigmas? People like expecting that you wouldn't like whiskey or wouldn't want whiskey or would only want a certain style?
Definitely. Yeah. My husband and I have been out at restaurants where they automatically hand me his drink and vice versa because they're making assumptions about who orders what. And, a lot of whiskey brands, I work with a lot of brands and I don't get hired by whiskey brands as often. And I think that there is this assumption that women don't drink whiskey.
Yeah. Well, I have the same in a restaurant situation as you do. If there's a boozy brown stirred cocktail, it is mine.
Yes, definitely.
Not my partner's. All right. Well, you mentioned Scotch as a particular thing you were a fan of. Well, I do not have Scotch for you. I have Canadian whiskey. Do you have any experience with Canadian whiskey?
Honestly, practically zero. It's probably the category I know the least about.
Yeah, it was really popular in the United States in the 50s through 90s, and still actually sells really high numbers today. But it's not at all hip or trendy anymore, right? It's not marketed. I only know about Canadian whiskey because I grew up in Canada, and we all called it rye there, right? All Canadian whiskey is rye, even when it's not by American standards. But Black Velvet wasn't a brand that anybody in my family drank, so I don't have any kind of experience with it, except for what I read about it, which is that it's supposed to be smooth.
Like velvet.
Like velvet, exactly. You've got the idea. Well, let's go ahead and crack the old bottle open. I also have a brand new mini bottle. Followers of the show will know that I get very annoyed when my grandmother's bottles aren't plastic because they evaporate. This is a nice glass bottle, but the modern one,
of course,
is plastic. And I think cost like $2 or something.
The label looks pretty similar, right?
Not bad.
No, there's a difference.
Yeah, a few differences, but they have kept their branding pretty consistent through the years. So it's been fun trying to track down. That's how I date it. I tend to date the bottles is by looking to see which label matches.
And what year is this one from?
This, I think, is 1980s, somewhere in there. Hard to kind of pin it down.
Yeah.
All right. Nice crack. Actually got the top off. This is not always guaranteed. Color very light. Sort of what we expect from a Canadian whiskey. This was really about the time period where people didn't want robust flavors in whiskey. You're competing as a whiskey with vodka and tequila,
Right.
not with bourbon. So
It smells nice. It's I don't know, kind of sweet, like sort of some honey. notes.
definitely that little bit of sweetness, very light aroma. With first whiff, I've started getting into a section of the collection that has a lot of Canadian whiskey in it, and I just tasted Canadian Club recently, and I brought it to my nose and I went, oh, this smells like Canadian whiskey, right? There is something, this through line that I think I'm going to start to notice. Canadian whiskey starts with sort of like a more neutral spirit, almost like a grain whiskey in Scotch, and then a flavoring whiskey that's usually made of rye, like single malts in Scotch. So if you think about how blends are put together in Scotland, that's kind of what's going on in Canada. But that light whiskey can be, 90% alcohol by volume, right? So it could be almost vodka level before it's aged. So I'm not getting a lot of grain, is basically what I was trying to say there. Do you got anything?
Yeah, so kind of fruity, like almost like some apple fish notes.
Doesn't have a lot of notes. I will agree with the fruit. A little bit of pear, maybe. Might just be thinking about that because it's fall. All right, you want to go in?
Yeah. Sure.
Tastes like Canadian whiskey. Or Canadian whiskey of an era. Yeah, what are you getting?
Yeah, I mean, I don't drink enough Canadian whiskey to say, but it's kind of what I maybe expected, I guess.
Okay. It's really light in flavor. Finish has a little kind of toffee caramel warmth.
Yeah, it does.
What would you do if you were trying to mix a cocktail with this?
Oh, good question. Probably like some kind of sour or, some kind of highball with lemon. And yeah, I mean, I think it might be nice to mix with, but it's not maybe something I would want to sit down with a glass. So.
Exactly. But, from a smoothness perspective, like flavorless is kind of like when people say smooth, what do they mean when they're talking about whiskey, right? And I think this is it. It's something that's not very assertive. It really is kind of like, all right,
yeah,
you can just drink this. It's not going to disturb you. Studies from that time, they would do surveys and tons of people said that they didn't like the taste of alcohol. Right. And so that's how you start to get into vodka as being so popular, because people in the 70s are actually like, no, I don't want things to taste like alcohol.
Right.
Yeah. It's kind of, besides the heat, a little hard to know what you're even tasting here. Well, what do you think they will have done with this modern one?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm curious if it'll taste more familiar to a modern palate or if they've just kind of kept it the same. What have you noticed with other Canadian whiskey?
Well, color-wise, these two are
very similar.
Virtually identical. The Canadian Club, when I tasted that one, the modern one was much more peppery or tasted more like a rye as we would think about it in the US. So I don't know. We'll see. I guess that would be my prediction.
That would be slightly
it would
more...
be a little bit more flavorful. But who is the market? As I was saying, this stuff's not marketed anymore. So who is the market for Canadian whiskey in the US? For old school Canadian whiskey. Right. There are some modern brands that are great and everything we think of when we think of whiskey. But who's still buying Black Velvet?
No, I was wondering, I mean, there's probably these dedicated drinkers where this is their whiskey, and I'm sure they would not like a change in the flavor profile.
This and Canadian Mist, which just showed up on a list of 10 worst whiskeys ever that I happened to read.
What was number one?
Oh, I think it was a fish infused whiskey. So it was a broad list. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yeah. It smells very different.
Definitely more on the nose. And some of that could just be the age. So this bottle from the 80s, so about 40 years old, probably, where our modern one, the older ones just tend to kind of like tighten up a little in the bottle, almost like wine does. So we might get more out of the old one as we let it sit.
There's this totally new note in it, but I can't place it.
I thought banana.
Yeah.
I thought it had
tropical. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it had like a Hefeweizen
Mm-hmm.
kind of a vibe. It's gone now.
Actually, yeah, you nailed it with that. Bison, yeah.
No, those are my least favorite beers.
Same.
I like a wheat beer. I just don't like the banana and a half. All right. Kind of most of the same, not very assertive, a little bit more aromatic. Anything else?
Ready to.
All right, ready to feel the smoothness?
It is different, but as far as kind of the, I don't know, it's not a whole lot more robust or flavorful.
It's got a bit more going on.
Definitely. Yeah.
Which again, I just wonder sometimes if the older ones just kind of soften, right? The flavors integrate. And that means you kind of lose some of the layers that maybe we get in the newer one. Not that there are a lot of layers in this modern bottle of Black Velvet. But it does have a more pronounced front, middle, and end than I would say the old one did. Fortunately, it doesn't taste like banana. A little peppery bite in the middle. But man, you can see why the way they would mix these in ye olde days was, with water. Like this and club soda as a highball, or this and ginger ale, where you just taste the ginger ale. You don't even really notice.
Right. Yeah. If you mix it with anything that has a lot of flavor, it would disappear.
Absolutely. Kind of like vodka.
Yes.
All right. Well, I would say it meets its goal of being smooth. I would definitely not pick it for pretty much anything.
Yeah, probably.
So we will let the velvet lovers keep loving their velvet, and maybe you and I can open up some scotch after this.
Sounds like a plan.
So where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram as garnish_girl, and my blog is at garnishblog.com.
And you can find me at mytinybottles.com. You can also find me at mytinybottles on Instagram and Facebook, and at TammyLC on Blue Sky. That's where I'm most active. So if you haven't gotten the Blue Sky bug yet, go check it out. You can also check out my Patreon for bonus content. Perhaps more of the fabulous Black Velvet ads will make their way there. And otherwise, hit a like, hit a subscribe, leave a comment, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.
Cheers.
I'm your host, Tammy Coxon, and I'm here today with Katie Stryjewski. Katie, why don't you I was going to say better known as Garnish Girl. Okay.
That's all right. It'll give me something to say.
Okay, take two.